Tommy, what I want to do is allow the viewer to come on a journey with you. And I think what matters first up is to hear why you got to a place that you were at the court that day in Leeds that led to your arrest. So take me to you growing up. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Luton town. It's a working class town with a very diverse population. It's gone from, so I was born in 1982. When I was born in 1982, we had one mosque. Now we have 35. So I've watched that change in the town. Just so people understand, Luton was the launch place for the 7/7 bombers. It was the home of the fertiliser bomb plot. It's, in fact, so many terrorist atrocities have been linked to Luton. Al Mujahideen, who are now a proscribed terrorist organisation, Omar Bakri, Abu Hamza, who's in prison in America, their head office was in Luton.
So Luton town for you was home. You grew up there. Your mum, I think she lives, or you grew up with your mum there?
I grew up, yes, my mum come from Ireland. She come from Dublin when she was 6 or 7 with her family. And like most people in Luton, if you line up my 30 friends, 30 best friends,
yes,
we are all sons of immigrants, pretty much.
And you're a son of an immigrant.
Everyone's from the sons of immigrants, really, in Luton. And I've seen the town, so that's never been a problem. Everyone's got on fine and integrated fine, assimilated fine. But growing up, I was trying to understand there was something very different about what I saw as, which I at first thought was a Pakistani problem. I saw the Pakistani community showed a hostility towards everyone who wasn't Pakistani. And then only through growing up and learning Islam, I understood that it was the segregation and separation taught to them through Islam.
So in Luton growing up, you know, you're there, you're growing up as a young lad, and you're seeing that there's all these different people, you're all mixing, fine, but there seems to be this one population, the Muslim population, or those that believe in Islam, that don't want to belong, don't want to integrate.
If I just put it into basic terms, if you went into the school dinner hall in my school,
in a state school,
in a
normal school,
yeah, in a normal school, you'd have whites sitting with blacks, sitting with some Chinese, sitting with some Indians, everyone sitting integrated at their tables, and in the corner of that dinner hall you'd have 8 tables of Muslims. Separate in everything. I never understood this. I never understood it until I read the Quran. I never understood until I read so many passages and so many verses saying do not be friends with the Christians or the Jews. And that's the first, it was like, I had so many light bulb moments in my life that were just like, now I understand. Now I get why we have this whole segregated Sharia community that are not integrating, that are hostile as well, that are hostile towards us. And that's not all of them, because even in school I would have made friends with Muslims.
Let me ask you some questions about growing up in Luton and the separation. So the separation of financing, the separation of policing. How does that work in Luton?
So, another example, again, I'll give to Luton. When we formed I formed an organisation in 2009 which to try and highlight a lot of these problems. And when a journalist first come to see me, I took them up to the estate that I was originally grew up in as a child. I said, look at that park. That park is from the 1980s. And then we drove down to the Muslim community. I said, look at that park. That's a state-of-the-art £350,000 park. You want to know why we're frustrated? And we're frustrated because all of the funding, everything has been given and handed, and the organisation towards the Islamic community, everything, and that's not. I'm not saying it's the Muslim community's fault.
So for clarity, the funding, so government funding coming through to councils, because it's how it's worked in the UK. We have councils. You see Labour councils, and they're pushing funding to the Muslim community, presumably because that's where the vote's coming from.
So in Luton, we have. As I said, it's 30–40% of the town is Muslim, and when we have our elections, that 30–40% is enough to win the vote because the majority of people aren't voting. Now, so if they do a deal, and we've known this for years, the Luton Council of Mosques, which was the leader, would coordinate all the mosques together. They'd sit down with the council, they'd do a deal, they'd then be specifically told who to vote for and how to vote, and they'd regain their power. And as someone from a white working class background, we've simply were forgotten and neglected, and that's a feeling that we're looking at the Labour Party, who have gone all out and given every other community everything, and that's why even currently white working class children are the biggest underachievers. In Luton we have the Luton Islamic Centre, which is a mosque. which was where Shaleen, the most recent Westminster Bridge, the man who done
the terrorist attack against Westminster,
done the attack there. He was a paid teacher for that mosque. The Stockholm bomber was from that mosque. Luton Borough Council fund from our taxpayers' money that mosque. And
I think you said that 9/11 bombers were celebrated in Luton. Could you explain that?
So just so people understand, this would be the. When I formed an organisation called the English Defence League in 2009.
English Defence League.
In 2009. That wasn't just a spur of the moment thing. That was a build-up of watching my town decay, watching it be taken over essentially, watching pure venom and hatred go unchallenged against everybody. And so people understand, on September the 11th, after September 11th, we had posters, and I'll show you a copy of these. Posters were put on all the phone boxes, all the shop windows. Magnificent 19, a celebration of the 19 suicide bombers.
So Magnificent 19, the 19 suicide bombers launched against America 9/11.
Yes.
They were celebrated in the town of Luton that you grew up in.
I remember getting phone calls that the college, there'd been all cheers in the college by.
And as a reaction to that, at the age of 21, growing up in this town, you created something called the English Defence League.
No, so first of all, I tried to first raise my head about it at the age of 21. Where I organised a demonstration called Ban the Luton Taliban, because a group headed by Omar Bakri and Abu Hamza, Abu Hamza has the hook, he's in an American prison now. A group, their head office was in my town. They were sending people to fight for the Taliban. I organised a demonstration to oppose against them, and from that I was attacked and targeted, and I kept my mouth shut then for 5 or 6 years. But then there was a soldiers' homecoming parade where our soldiers were attacked and spat upon again by this same group. That's when I formed the English Defence League.
So soldiers coming home from fighting the Taliban, soldiers coming back, there was a homecoming parade. Those soldiers, I remember the footage of this, watching it, those soldiers were spat on, there were protests there was a big Muslim gathering essentially that were abusive and horrific to our British troops. That was the trigger that caused you to finally set up the English Defence League and actually position yourself then as a target.
Yeah, that was the trigger, and because of what had happened when I was 21, I was now 26. Because of what happened when I was 21, that's why I decided to try and cover my face and try and use a different name, because I knew what's coming.
And then take us from this 21-year-old and then a 26-year-old with the English Defence League, take us to the Tommy Robinson stood outside court. So just to explain, the thing that led to your arrest, it's an ongoing court case, so we still have to be very careful. It was broken into 3 parts. One part was done. This was the second trial of a group of men accused of grooming and trafficking young girls. You were stood outside the court on the day of the trial, correct me if I'm wrong?
On the day of, the trial had finished. So the trial had finished and the jury were there to give their verdict. So the trial had finished. And I was stood there on that day. And the reason I was stood there on that day is what I've tried to do since forming the English Defence League. I've travelled the country and I've researched and I've spent time with families, and I've seen the true extent of this, what is called grooming, which is more of a rape jihad across our country. And I feel that things are still being hidden and the public are not really aware of the size of this problem. For example, we have young girls that have been murdered and chopped up and put into kebab mincers, and no one knows that. We have young girls who have had hot iron rods with the letter M and branded on their back, and no one knows it.
But you standing there that day, you have your camera. What sort of camera have you got? An iPhone?
I just went with I had my iPhone and
what were you saying?
I was just detailing the men's names. So before I went there, I had researched and I'd looked at the contempt of court laws, which I was aware of, and I was also aware that the judge has no power to put any reporting restrictions on any information that's in the public domain.
And the BBC, our British state news broadcaster, they had already printed, I'd seen them, I think I'd tweeted them, the names of the individuals. That was already in the public domain.
All the information that I gave was already in the public domain.
And where you were standing outside the court, were you right outside the door? Were you inside the door? Where were you? Had you asked someone where you could stand?
Yeah, so that morning I'd gone into court to try and get the full details of their reporting restriction. There's so many guidelines that they have to have. For example, on the screen where the defendants' names are listed, it has to say there of the reporting restriction. It didn't. I have a photograph of that screen. It did not. There was nothing on the door. So I then stood outside, and obviously I presumed that the reporting restriction can only be for the verdicts, because and for the specific detail from in that trial. It can't possibly be for any information that's already online and out there.
So the trial had finished.
Trial had finished.
You were stood outside.
Yes.
You repeated information that was already in the public domain, the names.
Yes.
Did you film any of the men going in?
The defendants who were walking into court, yes, I filmed them. I made sure not to film anyone but them. So there was Muslim women walking into court. I turned the camera away from them. I was fully aware that you couldn't record jurors, witnesses or anything like that. But defendants on trials, as anyone would see of any case across the UK, every time I've ever gone into court, I'm photographed and I'm filmed. So I filmed them. I wasn't aggressive towards them. I asked them how they felt about their verdict that was coming, because they were getting their verdict that day. I asked them a simple question, and I was very calm and reasonable and polite. I made sure of that.
Did anyone ask you to stop filming? Did anyone tell you to go away?
No, I actually asked the police officer if I was okay to be filming where I was filming, to which I was told yes.
What happened next?
Next I was arrested, and I could see more police come in. No one warned me, no one said anything actually. I saw the judge up at the window with the police officers, and then all of a sudden I was handcuffed, I was arrested. I was told I was being held on breach of the peace. And then I'm brought into court, and the first thing I say again is, I need to speak to my solicitor. You can't speak to your solicitor. There's no facility for you to speak to your solicitor. I said, I need you to get a message to my solicitor then. Again, I could, no. Then I'm taken up before the judge with no solicitor, no lawyer. I'm taken before the judge where 5 minutes of an hour-long video is played, 5 minutes. And then he says,
your video?
Of my video that I made outside court. So then I'm told I'm taken back down to the cell. When I'm taken down to the cell, a lawyer that is by the state is produced for me. And I say, I want my lawyer. I want to speak to my solicitor. He says, you can't. That's not going to happen. We're taken back up to court again with him present. And this is one of the main reasons why I was released, why the top judge of this country absolutely slammed what had happened in Leeds court. When I got to prison, I'm sitting reading all these reports that I pleaded guilty to contempt of court. I wasn't even asked to plead guilty or not guilty. At no point did I stand up and say guilty. He sentenced me to 13 months of contempt of court. He then enforced a reporting restriction.
Yeah, so we weren't allowed to tell the story of you then being arrested and charged and being sent inside for 13 months. We weren't allowed to write that up as I normally would have, because there was a ban on me or anybody reporting, and indeed people had already written a report, removed their reports.
Well, and apparently it's this ban, this section 4, that apparently I've been sent to prison for breaching this reporting restriction. Now, as you've said, some newspapers run stories.
Breitbart, others, of course.
And then they had to remove them. They breached the same law that I've just been sentenced to 13 months for. Now, if you read the law, this is where it gets... When he sentenced me to 13 months, if you read contempt of court law, the judge is not allowed to issue a reporting restriction. The reason for this is, under contempt of court, you don't have a jury. So you have a judge who is he arrests you and he's the executioner. He arrests you and he sentences you, he hears you, he tries you, he convicts you. Now, how much power that puts in a judge's hands to be able to sentence you without anyone else, that's too much power that by law, he has to instantly let the public know. Anyone can read these laws. So I've gone through everything when I was in prison.
Let's move to prison. How does prison work? When you get to prison, first of all, you're walking in dressed as you are. What happens to you?
I was booked into reception and I was put on an induction wing. You go on a wing of prisoners, probably 100 prisoners, 3 levels, and I was put in my cell.
Describe to me the cell. Describe what I'm seeing.
The cell is just a bed, a metal frame bed with and it's not a mattress. It's like a blue. Oh,
those blue squidgy little foam pads. They are really.
But in the prison cells, they're about that thick.
And they're wiped clean, aren't they? They're that sweaty stuff.
And you're given a bed sheet, and you're given the same blue mat like that as a pillow, a rock hard blue mat. You're given that. Then you're given a plate and a TV.
So when you first went to prison after you'd done your time on the induction wing, they moved you to the hospital,
2 days they moved me to hospital,
which actually was a relatively safe and secure environment for you.
The main induction wing, there were Muslims on it, but you have to understand that in the demographic of the area of the country I was in prison, only 7% of that population within the prison were Muslim prisoners.
But then
I had my first legal visit in the prison, where then we booked a visit for the Friday where my QC was going to come and we were going to discuss my appeal and to appeal the conviction and appeal the sentence. Now, days before that appeal, in the morning, my door opened, they said, "You're going." And I said, "Where am I going?" I said, "Why am I going?" And the reason I was so confused is that they had me in a position where I was fine. It was very easy for that prison because
they could manage you easily.
In the hospital, there's no Muslims. There's no Muslim prisoners.
So moving us along, you were moved to a different prison. Tell us about the new prison.
I was taken from HMP Hull to HMP Onley. And then when you get to a prison, you have an original meeting with the prison staff where they talk to you. And he said, well, look, obviously you're aware that there's a large Muslim population in this prison. I said yes, because it's a London prison. So although it's in Onley, it's a London prison. So the population of London, when they go to jail, they go to certain prisons. So it's a London prison. So obviously we know what the population is going to be. So I said, okay. And he said, like, you should self-isolate. And now self-isolation would be, if I was a prisoner and I wanted protection or I was scared, what I'd say is, I don't want to come out. I don't want to come out myself. So I said, I'm never going to self-isolate. And he said, well, it's going to be dangerous. I said, every time I open my front door, it's dangerous.
So the government chose to lift you out of the prison where you were being held and were relatively secure in terms of your safety and felt your well-being was relatively managed, and lifted you and moved you to a prison with one of the highest Muslim populations, therefore putting you most at risk.
Hull prison was a prison that was governed by the prison staff. I was moved to a prison that was governed by the prisoners. Did
they ever give you a reason why they moved you from Hull?
I asked the head governor of the prison, who has brought me here? He said, it's above my pay grade. Now,
okay.
Who's above his pay grade? It is the government.
You're now doing, in your head, 13 months. You've got to be in isolation. You've been put in the block. You've got a mattress. Tell me about your day. How many hours a day are you in that square room?
You're in there 23 and a half hours a day. And then, so you have the prison cells, say, that are here and here. And then for 30 minutes, they take you out and they put you into a cage that's looked upon by all of the cell windows.
So you're put in a cage like a little animal?
You're put in a cage for 30 minutes where you can then walk around for your exercise. Now, within minutes of me being put down the block, there were threats and screams and shouts because the Muslims had seen as I'm getting brought in. And what I didn't realise, which I was told, which I put a complaint in again, was that the prison imam had been telling the prison for days before I got there that he's coming. Was there an instruction against you? No. Giving people a pre-warning I'm coming to a prison means that they possibly could get one chance at hitting me. And once they've done that, I'd then be put down the block. Now, I wasn't going to self-isolate. They probably know I'm not going to self-isolate. That gives them an opportunity to get knives, to get blades. To make weapons. To be prepared. So I then put this in, I put in a complaint saying, how is the prison imam telling people, I'm super paranoid of I know what's gone on previously in my previous prison sentences. I wrote a letter to my wife and it was a detailing letter. Yeah.
You're right. It's all right. This is a letter to your wife from prison. What did you say?
To make sure they understood why I do what I do. And it's me believing that the worst will come.
That you will die in jail.
The worst will come, and I want my children to know that I haven't, At this point I know what they're going to do, what I believe they're going to do, and that I know no one can tell me why I was brought to that prison only. No one can tell me. So I know intentionally, and previously I've been locked in rooms with Muslims in prison, so I believe that, and then in that first week in the block, I'd then been told I'm getting moved. So I said to my wife, I'm getting moved, but nothing from the outcry outside, from Lord Pearson, who's a lord in this UK, making comments to make sure I'm safe, I knew that nothing had been done to do that.
So you're sat down writing your letter to your
Yep.
wife and your children, and what are you telling them?
That I know by doing what I do that that moment will come. And I know that, and I've chose that.
And you want your children to know that you didn't choose it over them.
So I detailed to my wife that it's not about them, it's not about our children, it's about every child, everyone's. I'm not apologising because not for 1 minute I'm sorry for what I've done. I'm apologising for what it's caused.
Just tell us a little bit, because many of us won't
Yep.
have heard about the calling, the shouting, the banging, the window.
So from the first minute I was put in there, one prisoner in the cell next door spent 6 hours all night, which I had to remind him he's in a prison cell, you can't kick through them.
Tell me about the food, Tommy.
The food. So all of the servery in each of the wings is Muslim. They're in control of the main
They're
job,
bringing
the best
you your
jobs.
food
My food is then taken to my cell.
on a specific tray that they know is coming to you. They know it's coming to you.
With your name on it.
So they know.
Yeah, everyone knows.
And then they're saying, did you enjoy it?
To enjoy your dinner. Anything can get smuggled into prison. Yeah? Prisoners are getting mobile phones this big in. To get something that big, whether it be a drug or a rat poison or anything they want, yeah, to put into a dinner, is going to be easy. So I don't want to give that.
Because if you're going to die, you're not going to go out with
like
a...
that.
Tell me about the window in your block.
The
your window in your
cell.
cell. Pardon
So
me.
then, yeah, it took about a week before then.
Spit through the window.
Yeah, shit getting thrown through.
When they're throwing human feces,
Well,
their own.
This is quite regular in prison, so people understand. Prisoners
throw human
shit, throw human feces at prison officers' faces.
So this is you, and this is the physical and mental torture. Let me ask you one last question on this. You knew you were going to die. You'd reconciled that this would happen, and you'd written your letter to your wife and children explaining.
They didn't send the letter.
They kept hold of that letter.
They refused to send it.
How did you imagine? Because I've been somewhere near this in my own situations. How did you reconcile that you would be killed? Did you think about how it would happen and that it would hurt and that you would accept that pain? Where did you go with that?
I just believed that I was going to be moved prison again. That's what I was told. So in my first week, when I was down the block, I was told that they'd be moving me again. So I knew that they'd give one opportunity where they have an opportunity to get me, which has happened 3 times.
So you knew there'd be a moment.
I thought they're going to get a moment to get me.
Be got.
All I wanted to tell my children is the reasons why, make sure they understood that I done this because I love you. That's why I done it.
Currently, as it stands, you are going back to face another judge. That's correct, isn't it?
I'm going back to face another trial. To this point, right now, here, I still have no idea what it is that I've said outside court that they're saying has breached a restriction. Because bearing in mind, we know the law states they can't have a reporting restriction on information that's already in the public domain. Let's just, so people understand, reporting restrictions are regularly breached. Okay, people get a small fine. Now, it's only the fact that I was talking about Muslim paedophile gangs that has resulted in me being in prison for 30 months.
Okay. So let's put you now, you're going to be in front of the judge, let's put you in there in the Old Bailey. Tommy, what's going to happen?
I'm going to be convicted, I'm going to be found guilty and put back in prison.
You're going to be found guilty?
I know now, when I come up to this case, I'll be offered a deal.
You'll be offered a deal?
So.
What deal do you think you'll be offered?
If I plead guilty, that they will give me time served and I will go home.
Will you plead guilty?
What I said to my wife, which I need to know, I have my wife's support, my family's support, is I said that I never ever, the last thing I would ever want to do is bring down a court case that would affect those young victims. That goes against everything I've ever stood for. So I could never accept that anything I said, because I know it didn't, prejudice that trial. Because I know it didn't. We know it didn't because the trial went ahead. So I said to my wife, if I was offered this, Jenna, if I was, like, I can't. And then she said, I'll still be here when you get out. So in the early years of my activism, my whole family were begging me to stop and trying to make me stop. I think that they're fully aware that that's not going to happen. And I think that the government, if this is intentionally done to break me or silence me or stop me, surely by now, whoever's behind these little decisions, surely now you realise it hasn't and it won't. And right now, my voice coming out of prison, whether it be if you send me back to prison, when I come back out, It will be to a more accepted voice, a more respected voice. More people will listen to me than they ever have. And people right now are sitting disgusted, astonished, shocked.
For your wife to say, do you know what, Tommy, I'll still be here when you come out. Will you stand there and say not guilty? Is everything, is it all of Tommy Robinson that willing to face it again, that brutality, the razor blades, the shit thumped through your window? Are you willing to do that again because because of your pure authenticity that what you did was not wrong?
Yeah, it's not what I did. It's not just what I did was not wrong. It's what it represents. It represents far more than Tommy Robinson. What currently this has happened when I've been in prison is a movement that has created that is not solely about Tommy Robinson. It's a movement of feeling from people in this country who feel that they're not being represented. And that's not even about my story or me personally. This is people see, hold on, not if their attempts to silence me is to silence you. It's to silence the public. It's to silence, if they want, and we've seen this is going on across the world, the deplatforming, the taking away of social media platforms, and then the government and the oppression and the arrests and all of these things that are happening. It's not just, if they silence what I say, they silence what you hear. And I think it's gone so far. And in fact, if I say, which I've said to my wife, if I say I'm willing to die, do you run and do you hide? And the main thing that right now is really eating me up is that I like to fight. And if something's in front of me that I can battle, I'd stand there and fight it. But what they've managed to do and what they've done cleverly is to cause me damage that is hard to fight. If, for example, in these cases there weren't reporting restrictions, the last 5 major Muslim grooming gang conviction cases have had these reporting restrictions. If there wasn't, every single day we would hear in our media and online, and the public would read every day of the horrific, sadistic, sickening, disgusting, barbaric things that were happening to these children. We'd hear of the comments made to the children, the racial comments, the religious comments. We'd hear it day in, day out. Now, by putting a reporting restriction and saying that it's to maintain a fair trial, then what we get at the end of a year-long trial of whether it be 30 men or 40 men, and there's all these, you'll get one day's news. And if you miss that one day's news, then it's gone. And I think that that's what these reporting restrictions are doing. If I stood outside court and nothing I said could prejudice that trial, then why am I being imprisoned for it?
But you're willing to die for what you believe in?
If someone has to fight, let me fight, not my son. And where we're headed as a country, our next generation will look at us and they will never forgive us for letting the current situation go.
Tommy Robinson, thank you very much indeed for your honesty, for sharing at a level that's quite extraordinary, and thank you very much.
I spoke about it as well.
I know. Thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you.
That was Katie Hopkins interviewing Tommy Robinson. Tommy is heading back to court on September 27th. The government is making him go through the whole thing all over again, and so he has to hire lawyers all over again. If you can help him cover the costs, which will surely be tens of thousands of pounds, please go to savetommy.com. The government is trying to break him physically, psychologically, and financially. Let's help him fight back, at least with that last part. Please chip in at savetommy.com.